Afternoon, everyone. Welcome.
Buenas a todos y bienvenidos.
My name is Krista Murphy, and I'll be your facilitator today. Before the meeting begins, I'd like to share language access instructions for today's meeting. We will have bidirectional interpretation from English to Spanish and from English to Mandarin, as well as American Sign Language. Please note that the translation globe will not appear until after we've read through all language instructions in Spanish and in Mandarin. I will now turn things over to our Spanish interpreter to share directions in Spanish. Next slide, please.
Buenas tardes a todos y bienvenidos a esta reunión. Me llamo Miriam y seré su intérprete. Esta reunión contará con interpretación simultánea bidireccional en inglés y en español y mandarín. El globo de traducción no va a aparecer hasta que yo haya leído las instrucciones en inglés y en español y en mandarín. Por lo tanto, pedimos que todos los presentes seleccionen su idioma preferido para facilitar la escucha de los presentadores y de los participantes con claridad, evitando que se produzcan fallas técnicas o interferencias entre los tres canales lingüísticos cuando no se selecciona uno de estos. Si está usando una computadora, verá un icono en la pantalla inferior de su pantalla a la derecha en forma de globo que dice Interpretation. Haga clic ahí y seleccione Spanish-español. Si está utilizando un iPad o telefónico, localice el menú de 3 puntos que aparece arriba a la derecha. Haga clic en el lenguaje en donde dice Language Interpretation, interpretación de idiomas, y elija Spanish-español. Cuando sea su turno de hablar, por favor recuerde hablar con voz fuerte y clara y a un paso moderado, ya que la intérprete estará interpretando de forma simultánea al otro idioma. Now I will turn things over to Mandarin interpreter. Thank you.
大家下午好，欢迎参加今天的会议。我叫志军，我是今天的口译员。本次会议将提供英语、西班牙语和普通话的双向同声传译服务。在我们用英语、西班牙语和普通话阅读完指示之前，顺上的翻译地球图标不会出现。因此，在所有指示讲完后，我们请所有与会者选择他们偏好的语言，以便清晰地听到演讲者和参与者的发言，避免在3个语言频度中因为选择语言引起的技术故障或干扰。如果你使用电脑，请在荧幕下右侧找到地球形状的图标，上面写着翻译 Interpretation， 点击并选择中文。如果你使用 iPad 或者手机，请在右上角找到3个点击的菜单，点击语言翻译 Languages Interpretation， 然后选择中文。临到你发言的时候，请记得大声清晰地说话，并保持适中的语速，以便口译员会将你的发言同步翻译成其他语言。谢谢大家。I will now turn things back over to Westhead.
Thank you. We are now launching interpretation. If you prefer to listen in English, you need to use the globe icon or the 3-dot menu to select English. This will help avoid technical glitches and ensure that you hear any Spanish or Mandarin participant comments as they are translated into English. If you're on your laptop, please locate the icons shaped like a globe at the bottom of your screen, select the language interpretation symbol, and then select your preferred language. If you're on an iPad, phone, or similar device, locate the 3-dot menu on the right corner of your screen. Select Language Interpretation and then select your preferred language. A reminder, as always, to our presenters, our panelists, and to those offering public comment today. When you speak, please do so at a moderate pace so the interpreters can listen and interpret everything you say. We are now ready to start the meeting. Dr. Jaime Milam, over to you.
Let me know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. All right. So hello and welcome to the 7th convening of the EC-QRIS Advisory Panel. I'm Dr. Lupe Jaime Milam, Deputy Director of the Child Care and Development Division here at CDSS. I want to thank each and every one of you for attending today and participating in this discussion. The efforts addressed calls from the community and from system leaders to address inequities in the QRIS system. In 2020 and 2021, we heard from community through advocacy groups, surveys, and focus groups, which revealed that addressing workforce compensation was a top priority. The QRIS ratings were paused while the department took on moving the child care subsidies rate structure to an alternative methodology. We want to thank many of you that participated in that process. A public work group was convened and they recommended moving from a market rate-based system to a single rate structure based on the cost of care. The new single rate cost model is now finalized. You can find out more about these efforts at the Rate and Quality website. With these efforts to address compensation underway, CDSS launched this work group to begin the work to reimagine a QRIS system that centers equity, ensures QRIS making sense, and useful for families, and is accessible and beneficial to providers across all settings types. Let's go to the next slide. So we are excited to be here today to gather the 4th set of recommendations from this advisory panel. As the roadmap shows, we have been covering 2 equity indicator topics per month through December of 2025. When the recommendations will be gathered into the advisory panel final report. I want to emphasize that the panel recommendations are not intended to be the end of the QRIS revision process, but instead will be used to guide the next phase of this work. Our end goal is to achieve an equity-centered quality rating or recognition and improvement system, QRIS, that ensures all early learning settings are recognized and supported in providing quality experiences that enables California's children to thrive. A quality rating or recognition system is about the intersectionality of children, families, and the workforce to support quality, and each is essential to an equitable system. Let's go to the next slide. So a few reminders that we're working towards the following desired outcome. First reminder, QRIS is created in collaboration with providers and families. QRIS makes sense to families and is useful as they make choices for early learning and care settings. QRIS is accessible to and beneficial to all providers. QRIS works to reduce racial inequities for providers, children, and families. And finally, QRIS standards ensure that children's language, identity, and culture are valued, and they build important life and school readiness skills in a caring, supporting environment. Let's go to the next slide. To guide their work, the advisory panel has agreed to use this list of equity priorities and equity indicators as they share definitions of quality. The panel will make recommendations for each equity indicator should be considered to inform a revised QRIS system. The following questions are taken into account. And a minute here. First one is, what should this look like in our California context? The next one is, what process or strategy should be included? Next is, what process or strategy should we avoid? And then finally, what support or resources might be needed? Last month, the panel considered equity indicators 5 and 6. We will see the recommendations later today. In today's meeting, the panel will discuss equity indicators 7 and 8. Let's look at the process we use to maximize our time together. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so throughout this process, we want to make sure that the panelists have the chance to hear multiple points of views, including the perspective of guest speakers, fellow panelists, and members of the public. We will use the following cycle to discuss each equity indicator and support the panelists in forming their recommendations. The first is we will begin with a brief overview of how the indicator shows up in our current QRS, followed by a short presentation from a guest speaker with national expertise on the topic. Panelists will have time to ask questions or share comments with the guest speaker. Number 2, the panelists will then engage in a facilitated discussion. Use a note catcher document to record their draft recommendations. Number 3, after the panelist discussion, members of the public will have time to offer comment. And then number 4, following the meeting, panelists will have the remainder of the week to make any final edits to their own recommendations. After we collect all the recommendation notes from the panelists, we will compile them, condense duplicates, and share them back with the panelists. Panelists will be asked to vote for each recommendation by making a I agree, or I am neutral, or I disagree. The final set of recommendations will be shared with the public at the next ECQRS Advisory Panel meeting in November. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so let's review today's agenda. We will lead off today with some follow-ups from June's meeting. After that, we will move into the discussion around first equity priority recommendations. We are excited to welcome Leah Austin, who will share some considerations on the workforce conditions, preparations, and development. Then we will move into the panelist discussions, followed by public comment. We will then transition to our second topic, when we are excited to welcome Jackie Wong, Executive Director at First Five California, and Aaron Doobie, Education Administrator at the California Department of Education, who will share considerations about communication outreach and system alignments. We will again hold space for the panelists to discuss and provide public comment. And we will close with a reminder on how members of the public can stay engaged throughout this process. With that, I will now turn things over to Krista Murphy, who will review the recommendation of our panelists and submit following June's meeting.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jaime Milam. And thank you to all who attended June's meeting to share your thoughts with our panelists. And thank you to the panel for their efforts in creating thoughtful recommendations for the third set of equity indicators. We'll start with a look at the recommendations for Equity Indicator 5, eliminate harsh discipline and reduce suspension and expulsion. After thoughtful reflection and discussion, The panel has developed this set of 9 recommendations for Equity Indicator 5.
Después vamos a hablar con las recomendaciones de los indicadores de equidad
We have
5.
breakthrough of the Spanish translation. Interpreters, if you could please make sure you're on your interpretation channel.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
¿Me
I
pueden
can.
escuchar en
You're,
español?
Alma, you're on the public channel. Everybody can hear you.
Okay, I click Spanish. Am I in Spanish? No.
Not yet.
A ver, estoy en el de español.
Still on the public channel.
Estoy en el de español, pero no escucho a los que hablan en inglés. ¿Me escuchan? ¿Me escuchas en español?
Alma, we can still hear you. Miriam, why don't we switch back to you for the moment? And Jatiri can work with Alma to get her channel sorted out. Is that okay? Or me?
Entonces,
Miriam, are you able to take over the Spanish?
¿me escuchan en español? ¿Me escuchan en español? ¿Me escuchan en español?
Apologize for the technical difficulties, everyone. Give us one moment.
Yes, please. Give me 1 second. So I click here in Spanish. Can you hear me? ¿Me pueden escuchar en español?
Hey, Alma, we can still hear you. We're going to ask you to stop your interpretation for the moment, and we'll follow up with you via chat to help you get onto the Spanish channel. And we're going to have Miriam take over the interpretation for right now. Yes, I can hear you, Miriam. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Appreciate your support and your service, both of you. All right, if we can get the slides back up, thank you so much. So these are the recommendations that came from the panelists. This set of 9 recommendations is for Equity Indicator number 5. The panel final report will include the set of recommendations that you see here, and as Dr. Jaime Milam shared, these will be used to inform the next steps of the QRIS revision process. Next slide, please. We will now look at Equity Indicator 6, communication, family leadership and engagement efforts. After thoughtful discussion, the panel has developed this set of 13 recommendations for Equity Indicator 6. Again, these will be included in the panel's final report and used to inform the next steps of the QRIS revision process. I will now hand things over to Nadira Jones, Administrator of the Learning, Equity, Advancement, and Development Office. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Krista, and good afternoon, everyone. We are ready to launch the discussion and recommendation for the first equity indicator for today: workforce conditions, preparation, and development. In order to help set the context for this indicator, we have gathered some context information. If we can go to the next slide, please. I would like to share some of the current resources that are available in California around workforce conditions, preparation, and development. The QCC core tools and resource documents list the following resources: professional growth. We also have a professional growth manual for child development permits, permit information, and PD that qualifies for 21-hour requirements in tiers 3, 4, and 5, regardless of permit obtainment. Commission on Teacher Credentialing, CTC, Professional Growth Plan. CTC, Child Development Permit Worksheet. CTC, Child Development Permit Application page. Other related resources listed are the California Early Childhood Mentor Program, CECMP, Early Childhood Educator, ECE competencies, CompSat, and CompSat is the companion to the California ECE competencies, Child Development Higher Education Curriculum Alignment Project, CAP. There are also many other workforce supports listed, such as the PITC Online Infant and Toddler Group Care, California Preschool Instructional Network, CPIN, the California Teaching Pyramid, National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations, Family Childcare at its Best, California Department of Social Services Video Streaming Subscription Service, California Early Childhood Online, also known as CECO, and the CDSS Quality Initiatives page. We can go to the next slide, please. This update is from the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, CTC staff, and details upcoming changes to the Child Development Permit. The Child Development Permit verifies completion of required early childhood education, child development, preparation, and authorizes the holder to support, teach, mentor, or supervise in early childhood programs funded by the state of California. It may also be used in non-subsidized settings. The permit is issued by the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing and has been in place since 1993. In 2023, the Commission convened a Child Development Permit workshop to develop recommendations. Draft recommendations were presented in October of 2024, followed by an extensive field survey. Final recommendations were approved in February 2025. Commission staff are now drafting regulations to codify these changes. Key changes include reduced from 6 permit levels down to 5, titles for the levels shifted from role names, for example, assistant teacher, to numbered levels, early childhood educator 1, 2, and 3, and early childhood administrator 1 and 2. These titles are modeled on the NAEYC practitioner levels. Updated scope of authorization for all permit levels. Added a limited term provisional certification at select levels to support dual enrollment and apprenticeships, and to provide additional time for candidates to meet requirements. These changes will become effective upon completion of the rulemaking process. Staff anticipates submitting the rulemaking package to the Commission in late 2025. Then the state's Office of Administrative Law. Their approval typically takes 6 to 12 months. Staff plan to return with proposals for optional specializations in infant, toddler, bilingual, special education, and expanded learning. Per work group recommendations, staff will explore micro-credentialing/badging, a credit for prior learning, apprenticeships, Montessori, and related alternative pathways with an estimated 2026 timeline for proposals. To stay informed on these efforts, join the ECE News listserv for updates. And let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. We have gathered a high-level overview of what some of the other states are doing in the area of workforce conditions, preparations, and development. And here are some of those efforts. Some programs are offering teachers both individual and collaborative paid planning time. Some states are establishing a benefits package for staff that includes at least 4 of the following: paid leave for professional development, paid planning time, vacation, sick time, retirement, or health insurance. Some states are introducing a salary schedule and merit bonus systems that reward educational training, for example, degrees or certificates in early childhood. Some states are implementing intentional follow-up, for example, coaching, to support the application of content learned during professional development. And some programs are developing program-wide and individualized professional development plans that align with the specific needs of a program. And we'll go to the next slide, please. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Leah Austin. Dr. Austin is the Executive Director of the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment at the University of California, Berkeley. Bringing more than 20 years of experience to this work, she leads the center's agenda aimed at realizing a publicly funded early care and education system that secures racial, gender, and economic justice for those whose labor is the linchpin of its services. She is an expert on the U.S. ECE system and its workforce, and has extensive expertise in the areas of compensation, preparation, working conditions, and racial equity. Dr. Austin, we welcome you, and I will now turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Nadira, for that introduction, and for the opportunity to be here and talk with you all as you're considering work environments and preparation and generally conditions to support the workforce as part of quality, and especially thinking about equity. So really glad to be part of this discussion. You can go to the next slide. What I hope this panel is asking as a starting point in this process, and I know there's many questions that you all are considering, but hoping that you're starting with, what do equity and quality look like for the adults in the room with kids? Their work environments are also children's learning and development environments. And how do we get there in a way that disrupts the inequities that we have in our systems today and that are designed to reach those who are furthest from opportunity first? So I want you to think about some what ifs as we go through our discussion. And here's some examples from a justice toolkit that we have forthcoming. It will be out Monday, so I apologize we don't have it today. But just imagine, like, what are your what ifs? What if early educators were treated as the professionals and experts that they are in their field? What would that mean for how they're invited to participate in professional development, defining professional development, delivering professional development? How might that impact how educators weigh in on policy discussions and policy decisions that impact their work? So keep those what ifs in your mind as you go through today's conversation. You can go to the next slide. We have been working at the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment at UC Berkeley for almost 26 years now with early educators in a variety of different ways, research studies, policy discussions, strategy. And over the years, and in many different ways, they have told us what it is that they need to be supported and what supports their effective teaching and learning. And it kind of boils down to three main points. Access and the conditions to then be successful in preparation and ongoing learning. So not only what happens first with higher education and training, but also ongoing learning. They repeatedly talk about the need for safe, supportive working environments, including things like paid time for planning, not when they're responsible for children, not during nap time, but dedicated time for things like paid planning, reflection time. If you're an administrator, a family childcare provider, there's additional layers of administration and things that people need time and resources to be able to do. And of course, thriving compensation, which includes both their wages and benefits. And we hear this essentially from educators across the board, regardless of their setting, the program type, the funding that they receive, their own background and experience. These are really basic needs that any professional needs in their workplace, and is true, of course, of educators as well. Next slide. So let's start with a little bit about early educators in California today. Go to the next slide, please. We have a very experienced and well-prepared workforce. On average, early educators in California have more than 10 years of experience. Most have participated in college. About half of our home-based providers and center assistant teachers have a college degree, as do most teachers and administrators. Although very few are actually required in statute to have a degree. So people have gone well above and beyond what's actually required of them. And I think that's very important to keep in mind as you're considering what gets incentivized and rewarded, that there's also not simultaneously a penalty for not having something that's not actually required for people's jobs. Especially when you consider how low wages are. I think we all understand that wages are way too low. I know there are processes being designed to address that, but that also only impacts, a certain segment of the workforce. And there's many barriers to participating in education and training that also have to be addressed. So just want folks to hold that in your mind as well. You can go to the next slide. Also, as you're thinking about equity, and that means busting up the inequities that we have, this gives you a little bit of a picture of some of the deep inequities that we have in our existing system. So, we know, of course, that pay is incredibly low across the board, but a lack of pay standards, inequities that are baked into our system based on, funding and where money goes, and also biases that people hold, that this has led to women of color, especially Latinas and Black women, who are experiencing really particular harm for taking on this work. And this is an example of how that plays out. So equity is you're in part thinking about that in terms of preparation and working conditions, but that also can't be disentangled from wages and what people are paid, and how these systems and where resources are going connect with each other. So this is just an example here, looking at folks working in center-based programs. So if we look at this top line where it says $1.10 an hour, that's a wage gap between Black lead teachers and all lead teachers. And that's almost $2,300 a year that gap amounts to. And we see that across some other, when we look at this, break this up a little bit differently, comparing to their white peers and Asian peers, the gap continues to grow. We have a similar example when we look at this bottom example of $3.70 an hour between Latina directors and Asian and white directors. That's the wage gap per hour, $3.70. That amounts to $7,700 less per year that Latina directors overall are being paid compared to some of their counterpoints or counterparts. And we know, for example, that Black educators in California across all job roles are more likely than most of their peers, as an example, to hold a bachelor's degree. So they're having a higher level of education, but across job roles consistently being paid less. And so these patterns show up in many ways. So it's important to understand as you're thinking also about preparation and access, what do we need to know about that in terms of who's getting access, who's not getting access, what do people need to know, and then how does that connect to wages that people are earning, and the expectations of what people take on to engage in education and training. You can go to the next slide. Okay. Sorry, you can go to the next slide as well. So at CSCC, as I said, we've been working, continuously with early educators over our history. And as part of that, we've been doing research on what early educators need, what supports are helpful and necessary to facilitate success in education and training, especially for those who have persistently faced barriers that have undermined their participation in higher education. And we find that this comes down to what we categorize as kind of 5 areas that really contribute to success among working adults, among specifically early educators, women of color who are early educators, those whose home language is a language other than English, and those who are also working parents. So lots of ways in which people are considered non-traditional college students. And what we found is that when they're provided with specific conditions to support them, that they've completed education at rates that are higher than the average college transfer student. And so what are those things? Learning communities and cohorts. So being able to go through programs together, what we call access supports, that's things like classes that are at non-traditional hours that are located in people's community, near their home, near their work, community centers, resource and referrals, or first fives, buildings that are accessible to them. Skill-based supports. So that's things like tutoring, computer training when you're new to going back to school, figuring out how to use the online computer system. And these supports change over time, right? You need more of that up front. You might need a different type of skill-based support that looks different when you're further along, but working with participants to identify those. Academic advising and counseling that is specific to ECE. So it's very clear when people are participating in education and training, how that maps on to existing systems in California. How does what they're doing and ensuring that what they're doing maps on to the permit, professional growth hours, requirements that may exist in particular parts of the system, and helping people apply those apply what they're gaining to these systems. We've found over the years that's really a barrier. Lots of people participating and taking things that don't always align, or people aren't sure because there are really just so many different requirements depending on where you are in the system. And then of course financial supports. That's scholarships, but it's not only scholarships. We've seen programs like Illinois has done a scholarship program recently where they're doing tuition, books, transportation, I believe childcare, food may even be included during the times you're at school. So there's many components to financial supports. And there's been a national recommendation, as you see here, from the National Academies of Sciences that the existing workforce should not bear the cost, essentially, of participating and acquiring new knowledge, building on their competencies and qualifications, particularly if there are new requirements put in place, that there are resources to support them. Next slide. And then the work environment, right? So the other part of this indicator that you're working on, we know that early educators need safe, supportive work environments. If we figure out all of the things on preparation and ongoing learning, and that's great, and it's all the things are in place, but don't attend to then what happens when people come back and try to bring that knowledge and new learnings into their workplace. It's like we call it the hole in the bucket problem, where we put all this into preparation and learning, but it's kind of going out, or we're losing that if we're not creating the conditions that allow people to implement and support folks to implement new practices. There's Nadira kind of read some examples of what other states have done in offering supports. 3 items that we've been tracking at CSCCE as a starting point for states, not the only things, but a starting point in their quality systems, is whether they are including in their definition of quality things like paid planning time for educators, paid professional development time, and salary and benefit scales. And paid planning and paid professional development salary scales, those apply across the board. I think we hear sometimes people think, well, how do we do that, in home-based programs? And it definitely can be done in home-based programs, right? Thinking about what are the resources and supports, financial investments that are put into place so people can have that time, can have assistance, can make space for these very same things that are needed regardless of the setting in which you're working in. So we see things in addition to that around teaching supports, curriculum, support on how to learn or implement a new curriculum, access to the right materials, ensuring that there's support services or referrals that you can refer children and families in your program to if you need to. Learning communities. It's not only important in education and training, but in the workplace. Our family childcare providers, getting access to networks to support them and be in kind of learning and development together. In childcare centers, are there opportunities for teaching teams and across classrooms as well to come together and learn together? And of course, attending to people's well-being. Some of that is about economics, certainly wages and benefits, but there are other practices that support well-being. The working relationships in programs, making sure, people have furniture and equipment that is made for adults for them to sit in. Do people have, a break room, a place to step out? Those sort of things are also very important. And then in schools and centers, there's something what we call job crafting. And that's really about, do people have the ability, are there program policies in place that are specific about allowing people to, clarifying what authority they have to make changes in their classroom, to make decisions about their work. There's program leadership is another area where there's some very specific practices around observing and or providing reflective feedback, supporting professional growth, having professional growth plans for staff. In home-based programs, there's of course other layers of business practice supports and program management and leadership. So all of these things are really important components of workplace standards. You can go to the next slide. But the good news is, California is not the first ones to think about this, right? There have been educators and advocates and others for decades in California, across the country, and really across the globe, who have been thinking about the working conditions and standards that should be provided to early educators. 2 in particular I want to point out. One of the model work standards that was developed by center-based teachers and family child care providers a couple of decades ago, maybe a few decades at this point. They were updated in 2019. And they really lay out all of those areas that I just went through. What does that look like in programs? There's you know, a checklist and an assessment that programs can go through. It's something that you all can use in your process here to identify some of those standards. And folks are using these across the country. In Minnesota, state leaders are referring to the model work standards as they revise their quality systems. In Indiana, they've been using the model work standards in their coaching and technical assistance on quality and with directors and educators. In Washington and Wisconsin, they've been using this in their strategic planning around the workforce. And then from an international perspective, there's the International Labor Organization, and it's a shorter document. The model work standards are more like a workbook to give people an opportunity to kind of work through. The International Labor Organization has a set of policy guidelines. They're very similar. They map onto each other very well. It's a little bit more of a rolled up document. So this work has really been going on, and there's opportunities to learn and look at that. You can go to the next slide. You can actually go to the next slide too. So this process, you know, the panel what you're undertaking is really an opportunity for change, which I think is very exciting for California. You know, my colleague Caitlin McLean is often says, you know, poor working conditions are not inevitable. They're a product of policy choices. So that also means that different choices can be made, right? And there are different things that we can do. You can go to the next slide. And so I would suggest that the first thing in this process, in order to move to an equitable system, is really to recognize and ensure that what you're doing is remedying the inequities that are embedded in our existing systems, which include QRIS. And I think a necessary part of equity work is reckoning with the reality that our systems have been relying on the exploitation of our early care and education workforce, with the low wages that have been paid to them, the differing conditions that are driven by regulation and funding, not by what kids or educators actually need. And so as you all consider what's next and what's needed, I'm really going to urge you to actually reject the idea that ratings are central to that, or that they're a motivating factor of quality or improvement. Ratings we see introduce into really under-resourced systems and inequitable systems a market-based approach. It assumes people have enough purchasing power to select or pay for a higher rated program, or that publicly and privately funded programs are not influencing the same populations or childcare markets. But that's not the case in our mixed delivery system, right? We've seen examinations of QRIS in other states that are as different from each other as Mississippi and Wisconsin, which is, you know, part of why Wisconsin's undergoing strategic planning, that have found evidence of racism and bias in their rating systems. And I think given the patterns of inequities that we see in California, you know, taking a closer look, we would expect to find some similar findings in inequities. So, you know, quality, I would say, can and these factors on working conditions and your other indicators really can be addressed incredibly effectively without ratings. So you all are asking really important questions as you're going through this. Here's 10 questions. I'm not going to go through all of them. I wish we had our Justice Toolkit out today. It will be out on Monday, but it asks some really important questions that you can start with now and be asking throughout the process. These are questions that are drawn from collaboration with educators, as well as people doing justice and equity work in many other sectors and fields. But it asks things like, you know, who does a policy or an indicator or a process impact, but also who is the policy not reaching or who's excluded? And what are the answers to those questions tell you about how to move forward? So I would encourage you to to work with these questions like this continuously across the indicators you're examining, not just this one, because they're all connected to each other, that really can help shape an equitable approach to quality for children and their families and educators in California. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Austin, and we will be sharing that contact information here in the chat and really looking forward to seeing that equity tool. Next slide, please. At this time, we are going to move into our panel discussion. Panel, we will have 10 minutes for you to share your thoughts or questions for Dr. Austin. Please raise your hand if you'd like to make a verbal comment. If you would like to share comments in the chat, please make sure that you select everyone so your comments are visible to our public attendees. So panelists, please go ahead and raise your hand or indicate if you'd like to share a comment or if you have a question for Dr. Austin. Jennifer, I see your hand up. Is the hand raise feature not working?
I don't know where it is.
Okay. The regular hands work too. So Jennifer, will have you up first and Carolyn next.
I'll do old school. Thank you, Dr. Austin, very much. It's really helpful context. Comment and a question, or well, actually a couple questions. One is the 10 questions that you mentioned, are they available in another format? They're a little bit small to see on the screen, but it would be super helpful for our discussion today if those could be made available. And then the second kind of question and comment is about the percentage of family childcare. I think it was 56% who don't have a college degree. If the question is, do we have data on what percentage of those people do not have a high school diploma or GED? And the question is really about like, for those people is seeking to get college credit, is that a realistic assumption in the current way that college is delivered? And are they going to be successful? And do we need to think about the way that those permits, the coursework to get those permits are even delivered?
Okay, I think I'm tracking. Do you want me to jump in now? Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. So you could just remind me if I don't answer all the questions. So I will see, I don't know if with the slide that could somehow get to the panel so they can pull that up individually. Unfortunately, the toolkit is not going to be released until Monday. So after this, I'll see if I can get that to you for your next part of the session. I do have the percentage, I don't have it right in front of me, that do not have any college or high school degree. It's very, very small. Most of those who fall into the some college or less are really some college, that people have really taken some sort of college class. We don't know how many, but at least something in terms of how they identify their highest level of education completed.
Dr. Austin, sorry to interrupt. My question was really about those who don't have any college. How many don't have a high school diploma or GED?
I don't have the exact percent, I could look it up, but I think in that I guess what I was trying to say is in that some college or less, it's a very small percentage that don't have at least a high school diploma. So I don't know if I can get it right how quickly, but we do have that information. And then I think your next question was about like participation. Is that right?
Yeah, it's just about the way that post-secondary courses are structured. In addition to like, are they available in your community? But just the structure of a college course is somebody who hasn't been successful historically, in educational settings. Are they going to be successful trying to work towards an ECE permit?
I think that I would answer that a couple ways. So first, I would say yes. I mean, obviously, we don't know about any individual person, but yes, as a whole, like, people have the capacity to participate and be successful. It's really a matter of what are the structures and the systems and the delivery of programs and the resources and sources that are available to them. And I think we have seen with those, we reduced it here to 5, big topics, but there's certainly nuance in that. And we find that there's many different ways to deliver that. It's not only making some tweaks or modification to a traditional classroom. So some examples that come to mind, you all might be familiar with like the Advance College. And so they have a model, there are others similar to that, where, folks are doing, it's cohort, they're also in kind of hybrid in different settings, virtual, do some in-person, but there's a lot of those resources and supports to help folks come into a setting that might be new to them or unfamiliar to them, to access technology, to engage in material and have those intensive supports, right? Those are very important to have that. People call them different things in different systems, but to have folks that really can help small groups come into new learning settings. And again, I think even with that, you'll see that change over time of the level of intensity on the supports to acclimating that can be really different. And so a program like Advance is finding creative and different ways to deliver course content, right? And to engage. And some of that is also because many of the faculty and people in there have also in their program have been educators, right? And so I think that's also a really important piece of like who's engaged in the work and delivering it. There's apprenticeship models. In California, for example, ESEPS has several different apprenticeship models, and those are aligned with the California permit. And so those, again, take folks often who are working in the same workplace through a program. And so the way that the content is delivered, it's college coursework, but in a really kind of different practical, you're working, it's hands-on, you're like doing and you're learning and you're engaging all at the same time. So I think there's really interesting models like those that are showing to be incredibly, incredibly successful. And I think I will find the link, but we actually just did a project. We did an evaluation of an apprenticeship that was based in Alameda County, and can share that.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Dr. Austin. We have Carolyn up next, and then Mary, you'll be after Carolyn.
Thank you so much for your presentation. There were so many elements of it that resonate. And I'm curious what, as you ended your presentation, you talked about really the 10 points, and obviously but I'm a Caucasian woman. And so I don't always have the lens. I want to, and I want to understand what would your suggestions be for us as a team coming together to try and ask those questions and make sure that we're not making assumptions.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. Well, I think a few things. The questions themselves, I think are, and I realize we don't, it was very quick. I didn't go through all of them, but I think, there's some questions in there about, like who is part of whatever the group is in as a starting point. How are educators involved, incorporated, included? How is that representative of the workforce in California? This panel I know is also addressing family indicators with families and parents. And so those same questions can be applied. So I think it's as a starting point, like who's here? Let's look around, right? And start to ask like, well, who's missing? I think that's a very important question to ask. Who's missing? Why are they missing? And how do we ensure they're not missing? And there's lots of different ways to do that. Like this panel itself is set. So this panel is probably not changing, but who else are you talking to? Who are you engaging? What resources are being consulted? And how is that done in a way that is ongoing and not a, we just want to hear someone's, story or whatever, but like being so much more, I would say like intentional about that and figuring out how to thread on an ongoing basis that the populations who this is intended to impact throughout this work so that they really are included and involved. I think the other thing, and we had planned, we thought the toolkit was going to be out by the time this meeting came, but alas, 4 more days. Because it really has some of that in there. Like we talk about, like how do we even define equity and justice? Let's be clear about that and what that looks like. And so how do we learn, then what it doesn't look like to be able to really tackle some of those hard questions.
Thank you. Appreciate the question and the response. I thought I saw a hand up, but I'm not seeing it now. Panelists, we have a couple more minutes for questions for Dr. Austin. Please raise your hand either on camera, and I will try to scroll through, but it's helpful if you use the raise hand feature. All right, I'm not seeing any hands raised. Do you want to let the panelists know that we are getting Dr. Austin's slide deck out to you? You should get that in your email shortly. And then members of the public, as always, following these meetings, we do post all of the material onto the CDSS Equity-Centered QRIS website. So that information will be available to you then as well. Oh, sorry, Carolyn, you have a final comment?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. I was curious what your suggestions are as the political influences change over the years with elected officials in their terms of office. What suggestions do you have to add to stability for our field so that we can continue to make positive progress and not backslide in changes? And so I was just curious if you had any suggestions on how to sustain that positive improvement.
No small questions. I think as much as possible, embedding as these changes are made and progress is made, that they're attached to infrastructure, right? That they're attached to the state infrastructure, or some folks are also doing work at a local level, and not set-asides, right? Not we're doing this because we got this, one-time pot of money, we're going to see how far we can take it. Well, let's do that as proof points and then move toward infrastructure and embedding things in regulation and in law, right? I think, I'll point to New Mexico as an example. Hopefully everybody has heard that New Mexico announced last week, was it last week? The week before? Very, very recently, 2 weeks ago maybe, that they have moved to universal childcare, like for everybody in the state to access. I think it's not a coincidence that before that, New Mexico made the right to childcare something that's embedded in their state constitution, right? So there's a rights framework. And so I think when we move to thinking about what should be provided as part of our public systems and what people should have the right to access, that begins to change how we think about policy. So if we think people have a right to access childcare, early care, and education, that can drive how policies and programs are designed. And then if in that we think people have a right to have a living wage or a thriving wage, for example, for doing this work, that also will help shape and drive how that happens. And so that's not, of course, only advocates, but really shaping our policy leaders, our political leaders who take up that rights framework. And I'm also going to just drop in here for you all. Hopefully we can share it with the broader audience too. But we are having a discussion on the Justice Toolkit on Monday evening, if folks would like to hear that discussion.
Thank you, Leah and Carolyn. And one last final question from Roxana, and then we will move into recommendations. Roxana, please go ahead.
Oh,
Adelante,
thank
Roxana.
you.
Gracias.
Can you translate me? Because maybe it's better for me.
Yes, please offer your comment in Spanish and we will have interpretation.
Mi pregunta es, en California llevamos años en crisis y crisis de maestros, que no se paga lo suficiente, no hay maestros precisamente por lo mismo, porque por años se sigue pagando no igualdad al equivalente de lo que se vive y cuesta California. ¿Qué recomendación daría para esta crisis que lleva años tras años para proveedoras, para maestros? Exigen demasiado y no se paga lo suficiente. ¿Qué debemos hacer? ¿Qué es lo que California no ha hecho en todos estos años para poder combatir esta crisis? Gracias.
Thank you, Roxana. And I did not hear the translation coming through onto the English channel, but I wanted to let you continue because we can see from our audience, lots of folks were following along. I want to call on
I am the interpreter.
Thank you, thank you. Can
I'm
you
the
offer a
interpreter.
translation or we can have Roxana say again?
No problem. I am going to interpret in English.
Thank you.
I can say in English, okay, right now. Okay, we have a crisis for so many years in California. Teachers, they don't pay the teachers what is the cost living in California.
Roxana, can you hold on for a second, please?
Oh, yeah, sure, of course.
Gracias,
This is
Roxana.
Miriam.
Dame oportunidad. So I'm the Spanish
Anna that should be
interpreter.
interpreting, but if
and
you'd
I'm
like
going
to,
start.
I can interpret that section.
During many years, we have been in crisis.
Can you hear me?
In the market for
Would you like for me to
teachers
interpret?
and for providers, and they are not getting the money.
Can somebody hear me?
For the increase.
This is Miriam. It's not my turn, but I will interpret.
Inequality of
we have
what
a
you
crisis here in
getting as an
California
income,
where for years and
what
years
the
and years we
cost
haven't
of
been
life
paid what
is.
we are
Miriam,
having.
Hold on, everybody.
Yes.
We're getting both translators at the same time.
Very well.
We
I
need to
will
go
tell
with
you.
one or the other.
Thank you. It is Anna's turn. I stepped in because I heard that that there wasn't an interpretation going on, but I'm going to withdraw my interpretation. This is Miriam, and let Anna speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Anna, over to you.
So am I the Alma, the Spanish interpreter?
Alma, yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So do I continue with I stay or do I go back again?
Please continue. We could hear you until just a second ago.
Thank you. Entonces, we are having these inequalities on the cost of life compared to the income that we are receiving. So what will be your recommendation? Because year after year after year, that inequality is getting bigger and bigger because they are demanding that we providers, we teachers have, they reach certain levels, but it's not compensated at the same rate.
Thank you. Alma was at the end of the comment. Roxana, I want to hand back to you in case there is anything that we missed that you would like to add.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna say in English, that's fine. Okay, just I really want your recommendation because in California, we have so many years of crisis of teachers and childcare providers. They don't pay the same money for quality of life in here in California. California, we are in Bay Area and it's so expensive. San Francisco, San Jose, it's the most expensive area. And the money they pay for teachers and how the government asks for more qualifications, for more trainings, for this or that, doesn't match with the money they pay. What is your recommendation for this kind of crisis? How we can have more teachers or with more qualifications or more, actually for motivation, for motivation to be a teacher, like to motivate these teachers, these providers for childcare, like what we suggest for the government. They can see how we work, how hard we continue work, how appreciate to our work, especially childcare providers. We work so many hours, different kind of hours, different schedules, and we go classes. We are here in the meetings. We try our best for the best qualifications, but they don't pay to us like enough. What is your recommendation for the government? They can hear us. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Roxana, for just being so clear about this. I think absolutely, right, that there's a huge crisis. We were in crisis before people started paying more attention with COVID and kind of talk about that crisis, right? We've had this long-standing problem in California and elsewhere. I think, one thing I would just say, I think in any recommendation or anything like that that goes forward from the state, like, we cannot be asking people to get more education, get more training, and not pay people. And we also shouldn't be asking people to get more money in order to get more pay, right? Like, people need to be paid for the job that they're doing. And those two things should not have to be tied together, right? That you get paid for the work that you do. Then let's talk about what other resources are available to support folks who, want to participate or, gain more education and training. And I think at the beginning, when I was kind of making that point about what's not even required now and making sure that we're not, like, whatever's going forward is not penalizing people and keeping people from access to perhaps resources or higher reimbursement or whatever because of something that they don't have, that's actually not required, right? And let's not require something without having the resources to make sure people are compensated for that. And so that, like, we have to hold we have to hold, policy and policy leaders accountable to that. We can and be explicit about it and say it over and over and over again and think about how, movements are built and how people participate in activities. There's many communities in California and across the country where educators are gathering together, who are talking about these things, who are participating in ways of really demanding what is deserved and what should be. But that has to be sustained, right? And so how do we sustain that? Where are opportunities to, for other organizations to provide resources to support people to do that, to have your voice be present, be active. But, you can't do that if you're in your childcare program all day and the meetings are in the middle of the day. And so there's not an easy answer. And I wish I wish I could say it's this way and it would happen, but is not the case. But I think it's that constant pressure. It's putting that pressure, being explicit about what is being done, what is not being done. You know, I'm really glad California is having these conversations and talking about rate reform. But it's also the reality that when, you know, we as a state got pandemic relief dollars, we were one of the states that did not make it very explicit and intentional that that money was going to wages in the way that other states did. And many of those other states, not all of them, but many of those that did that continued those programs for the workforce after the pandemic money went away because they saw it was effective, because there were opportunities to, you know, that people were organizing around that. So I'm not sure I totally answered your question, but I really think it's about that continued pressure, but also being able to find the groups and organizations to support the workforce to have the ability and the time and the space to do that type of organizing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Austin. We really appreciate you coming to share your research and your wisdom with the panel today. At this time, I am going to move us into our panelist recommendations discussion. Thank you. Members of the public, following this discussion, you will have an opportunity to share public comments. So we see those of you who may have your hands up, just know we're not ignoring you. We have the public comment opportunity coming shortly. And we're running just a little bit behind. So in order to keep us caught up on time today, so we can have time to get to indicator 8 as well, I'm going to hold our conversation here with all 4 equity priorities at the same time, instead of going priority by priority like we usually do. So want to just offer up for you again, we are focusing this conversation around indicator 7, which is workforce conditions, preparation, and development. And the definition for this indicator is that workforce conditions, such as breaks, paid planning time, and adult-child ratios, are currently being addressed for subsidized programs through the rate and quality reform work advancing a single rate structure. When defining quality, consider these working conditions for fee-based and non-subsidized programs as well as subsidized programs. When defining requirements for higher education and professional learning, consider access for all, especially members of the workforce from marginalized and underserved communities. And our first equity priority is that all providers are recognized for their strengths and specific regulatory, health, and safety requirements. I'd like to pause and see if we have any comments or questions from our panel, especially in light of what Dr. Austin just shared. And also wanted to remind us, circle back to our second meeting when we had Dr. Junlei Lee present, where he shared that the idea here is true for every single study that I have come across. In order for care providers and educators to function well in their work with children and families, they must be well. Their well-being is foundational to an equitable and quality system. So based on what you've heard from Dr. Austin and your fellow panelists about promising practices that support provider well-being, what types of working conditions support provider and educator well-being? And how should programs that offer supporting working conditions be recognized? And as always, you have your note catcher document, panelists, where you will have time in the coming week to record your recommendations. And this forum right now is a space to share your ideas, thinking, or questions as you're grappling with what recommendations you would like to offer. Carolyn, please unmute and go ahead.
I'm struggling to understand why there is such discrepancy in the compensation and how do we eliminate that difference. I just am shocked. I am always shocked by it. And I was thinking as we listened and as I was processing about how can I help the folks that I work with, my colleagues. And I realized that there are lots of associations and groups that help with a lot of our skills. And I'm just wondering if there's a gap in how to negotiate and ensure that our compensation, as we accept positions that we're accepting, that we have the knowledge of what we can work on. And I also understand that there's very little profit for many of us in early childhood, that there are very limited funds often. And so I'm just struggling to try and process all of that. And I'm anxious and interested and eager to hear others' ideas. And then also, how do we make our resources available to all of our, there have been a couple things in the chat and questions that have been asked. How do we create opportunities for our early childhood professionals to continue to grow while still having the responsibilities they have to their program, their families, and their personal lives? So I don't really have any answers, but I'm just processing.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'll share what Roxana, one of our panelists, shared in the chat. She offers that fair compensation and benefits, looking for competitive salaries to reflect the importance of the work, mental health resources and paid time off. Financial stability reduces stress and prevents burnout. Grants or stipends for childcare providers contributing to their center's environment or infrastructure. Higher reimbursement rates for providers who support the well-being of their center, themselves, and their attendants, leading to improved program quality. Thank you, Roxana. Our second equity priority is around quality definitions that center family needs and priorities. And so in that lens, we would invite the panel to offer recommendations on what types of investments are helpful to ensure that the workforce has, oops, sorry, I'm skipping to the wrong. What do staff need to effectively center the needs and priorities of families? So when we're thinking about workforce conditions, preparation, and development, how are we supporting our workforce in centering the needs and priorities of families? The third equity priority is public funds are disseminated equitably to recognize and advance quality. And here we're asking for recommendations on what types of investments are helpful to ensure that the workforce has access to preparation and professional development. What types of professional development are needed? What working conditions are needed to support staff to engage in and to apply their ongoing learning? What is currently offered that is working well? What is missing? And what is being offered that should be adjusted or changed to make it more effective? And I'll pause there for thoughts or comments about equity priority 2 or 3. Carolyn, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Quick question, Krista. Is the attendance this evening larger than we've had during the day, or how does it compare?
Let's see, we have about 168 participants, which is pretty close, maybe slightly lower than usual. And thank you all. We did not mention tonight, we made an effort to respond to requests from panelists and from members of the public. We know that from a previous poll that we did here that there is no one time that does work for everyone. And so we appreciate those of you who are adjusting your hours to be available tonight, knowing that for some, this is the most convenient time.
So to kind of continue on that, I think that one of the things that we are hearing, I'm hearing consistently, is access and a variety of times, formats, delivery methods, choice for our providers on how they are able to access what they choose to access is an important element of that. And I think that goes whether it's education or ongoing training, professional development, and to have the funding available so that that can be at no cost, and then potentially in participating in it, that there would be some sort of benefit to offset the time away from their program.
Thank you, Carolyn. Isela, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Good evening. I wanted to try to offer maybe a little bit of, I don't know, I guess insight into, I love the presentation, and I too struggle with the idea of the disparity in pay across ethnicities, of like positions, especially because it's just not right. But my struggle isn't understanding why. It's the struggle is it's just not fair. But I feel like one of the reasons we see such a wide discrepancy in the ECE roles as a whole and the pay across different ethnicities really comes down to a mix of historical and systemic factors. So if we think of communities of color, they have faced barriers to education, professional development, and higher paying career opportunities. Within early care and education, roles often held by women of color, like assistant teachers, family childcare providers, have historically been undervalued and underpaid. The ECE, now keep in mind, these are the roles of people of color. And keep in mind, it's the lowest of the paying fields. And one of the most important jobs we have in early care and education is to care and educate, nurture, develop little children. And then we talk about, I want to talk about access to degrees and certifications that are needed to lead or take director roles is another barrier. And hiring or promotion practices sometimes carry implicit biases that favor our white counterparts for higher paying positions. So when you put all this together and the historical inequities, the systemic barriers, occupational segregation, undervaluing of care, our care work, the work that we do to care for children, it just creates a pattern where minorities are often in the lower paying roles, not because of lack of ability or their dedication, or even degrees, because we heard Black women are very educated, but because of structural and systemic factors that have been long-term established and have continued to perpetuate the system. So I think if we want equity, we really need to be intentional about addressing the barriers with equitable hiring, mentoring, and offering those opportunities for mentoring, pay parity, especially when we think about the K-12 world and having a structure similar. I feel like I've said this before, where that system is working to develop the teachers from the moment they come out of college with mentorship and coaching and partnering right away, where an ECE teacher, let's say for center base, comes out of a college and right off the bat, they're out looking for a job, and there is possibly, depending on where they land, no mentorship, no coaching, no support. It's like you got a degree, you're a teacher now, you're in the classroom, you're ready to care for children. So it also goes back to the preparation and the disparity of that within our own education system of early care and education versus the TK-12 system. And just valuing the profession overall and giving it the credit that it deserves, because we're building children's brains at the end of the day.
Thank you, Isela. And perfect way to wrap up this discussion section. That final equity priority is about racial equity approaches. So inviting you, as you reflect on what Isela shared and formulate your own recommendations, to consider if there are any additional racial equity approaches that should be considered when we think about workforce conditions, preparation, and development. Panel, I appreciate your time and your feedback on this indicator. At this time, I will hand over to George so we can open for public comments.
Thank you, Krista. Members of the public, you've heard from Dr. Leah Austin and now from the panel. We'd like to hear from you next. What are your thoughts about how a revised QRIS could best support workforce conditions, preparation, and development? We are now opening the verbal public comment, and for the public comment using chat, we have 10 minutes. So we ask the public please consolidate their thinking to one verbal or public comment. We're using a 2-minute timer. If you should run out of time, you may continue your comment in the chat, and I apologize ahead of time if I have to cut you off. Please raise your hand now if you'd like to speak. As a reminder, please speak slowly and clearly for our interpreters. Tessie, you are first up. Please unmute your line and go ahead and make your comment.
As a family child care educator in California, I would like to say that what I am hearing about the QRIS system and what I've experienced don't always go hand in hand. I have a master's degree in early childhood education. And so a lot of the questions when you're talking about people that have in their education when it comes to family child care and quality and what that looks like, it does not appear that anyone has actually been inside a family child care home. And a lot of times the QRIS system doesn't know how to handle us because we are not on the boards. We are not a part of the decision-making process. I was once told by a QRIS system that they could not help me or give me any education because I already had a master's degree. They couldn't do anything for me. Equity in this state is looking more like equality. Equity and equality are not the same things. If you're trying to fix the system, you have to stop trying to make things equal, because then you're going to continue the inequities that are built in the system, which are historical and built on the labor of Black and Brown women. Because of the way the ECE field came to be, family child care has not been a part of the ECE system. And if you continue to act like it's separate from the ECE system, we are not going to actually be able to fix it and make sure that equitable access is happening. So no, rating systems do not show what is actually happening in a family child care home because they don't actually see or understand what happens. I run a high quality program, but nobody will actually come and see that because they assume my quality is not there because I chose to take my degree and use it in my home and not in a TK system, which is also not truly equitable because I should be able to help children in my community and I am not able to because of.
I'm sorry, Tessie, your time is up, but please go ahead and finish your comment in chat. It's so passionate. We really want to capture all that. Deborah, you're next. Please go ahead and unmute your line and make your comments.
Thank you once again for allowing me to speak. This is Deborah Corley-Marzette, family daycare provider in Bakersfield, well-educated with a business degree from California State University, Bakersfield, with a concentration in business. And I also have child development units. So I want to say that there's so much I want to say, but I'm going to hurry up and say it. Dr. Lupe, you mentioned the cost model was finalized. Can you please put a link in the chat so that we can go directly to it and take a look at that? I would also like to say thank you to CCPU Training Fund, which offers direct opportunity for providers to earn their degrees, permits, as well as their GEDs. So thank you for that. That opportunity is there for providers, and thank you. I want to also say, when it came to equity, I want to say that equity also starts with opportunity. Sometimes when you go to some of these center-based daycares, that there's very few people who look like me, an African American, in their teaching, educating, and motivating the minds of California children. I would love to see more of that. I got 40 seconds and I sure want to use them. So I'm going to sum it up and say, providers, remember, speak up, speak out, and get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Serena Lynn, you're next. Please go ahead and unmute your line and make your comments.
Hi, thank you so much for letting me speak. I want to thank everyone that presented today, and I just wanted to focus in on the importance of wages and funding for our early educators across the board in all programs, center-based, family childcare homes, etc. Whenever we talk about equity in the system or quality of a system, as mentioned in the presentation, we're talking about is our professional workforce well? Are we paid well? And so I find these conversations slightly frustrating, I'll be honest, because I feel like we have the same conversation over and over and over again, and the rate and quality work group is not finished with its work. We have not received our increased wages. Our private providers who have not benefited from the hold harmless are seriously at risk of closing or already have closed. And I'm tired of talking about how much we care about our early educators when no one is funding them and no one is putting money to back the words that are coming out of their mouth. So CDSS, CDE, I'm frustrated, and I know that you don't pay us, but I think you do have some sway and way in talking with the legislature and could help make a difference here. Part of that difference could also be like working together to make things easier for providers. Providers are struggling with CDSS and CDE contracts because there's a lot of different requirements. Community care licensing is also difficult, as all of our programs, community-based providers, center-based providers, family childcare homes, as we try to serve younger children in this era of transitional kindergarten, community care licensing has to work with us. That is a system that supports us and will be best for all children. Thank you.
Thank you, Serena. Marcella Graves, you are next. Please go ahead and unmute your line and make your comments.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Well, good evening. Yes, I just want to piggyback on the other lady was saying we need more equity inclusion, and we're still not getting the true cost of care. And like she was saying, licensing, they need to work with us. And sometimes they make it difficult because there's so many rules and so many changes and so many more things we need to do. We have to do this, go to school for that, do this and that. It's always, changing. And they need to work with us. It's like they're not working with us. They're pushing us out. When they come out, sometimes different ones, they got different, tell you need to do this and you don't need to do that. It can get very daunting, confusing, exhausting. So I just feel that they need to work with us, and we do need to get the true cost of care, because we are not there. We haven't been there for many years, and we need to get there. A lot of us in school, we're trying to do a lot of things to stay up, to stay in business and stay with the regulations. So they also need to work with us, and we do need a true cost of care. We need to give us our pay and give us what we deserve, because we deserve definitely more than what we're getting right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcella. LaTanya Brown, you're next. Please go ahead and unmute your line and make your comments. Latanya, you there? You have to unmute. I'm sorry, Latanya, we can't hear you. Hopefully you can come back to you. I don't see any other hands raised at this time. If anybody else, we have time for one or two more comments. If anybody else. Pamela Rocha, please go ahead and make your comments.
Can you hear me?
We can. Please go ahead, Pamela.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. Childcare provider out of Siskiyou County, and I'm proud to be here this evening. I think we need to make sure that family childcare is included in the UPK, TK, and the kindergarten classrooms. Family childcare needs to be an option for the parents, and we're just taken off the table when it comes to UPK and TK and kindergarten. Kindergarten is not mandatory in the state of California, but yet parents feel that they need to take their kids to kindergarten. You guys need to include us in your regulations. We've been doing this work for far too long, and we're just as educated, but yet we're the ones that are undervalued and underpaid. So thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. We have time for one or two more, so I'm going to do Mary, Gaston, and then Lisa. Anybody else, please put your comments in chat. Mary, go ahead and make your comment. You have to unmute. We can't hear you, Mary.
Sorry, I think I'm on that wrong link. Actually, my name is Lily Sanchez, and I just want to talk about higher education. As you know, the QRIS required teachers and administrators to have certain level of education. However, it's not accessible for the educators. We're making minimum wages. We're making wages just to survive and support and sustain our families, but we don't make enough to pay for the education. Although some programs, they do offer scholarship, not all programs do. Educators who want to get the bachelor's, they want to get the master's. We do not have those opportunities. We don't have enough resources.
Mary, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you slow down just a little bit for our interpreter so that they can
sorry.
capture everything you're saying?
It's because I have limited time.
We'll give you a little extra time.
Okay, thank you. Like I mentioned, all of us are here because we really want to provide our kids with quality care. And that means we need to have trainings, education, go back to school, continue to learn the new strategies, the new philosophies. But how can we do that and we don't get support? How can we continue our education when we are going to end up being in debt for the rest of our lives? Because college, universities is not accessible for all, especially for us that we don't make enough money to continue our education. That's all.
Thank you, Mary. And our last speaker, public speaker, will be Lisa Finney. Lisa, go ahead and unmute your line and make your comments.
Can you hear me?
Now we can. Please go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, my name is Lisa Finney. I'm a proud Black ECE provider. Also, I'm an educator too. I have an associate degree. Also, I'm a Meisner trainer. I have a degree in acting, and I'm in SAG, and I'm also in the union. So I come into my childcare with theater background, acting background. I have a music room. I'm working with children with special needs. I bring services in. A lot of preschools don't do that. I'm open to that. I feel that as a mother that have had 3 kids with degrees, I'm well overqualified. All my children are STEM children, and I adopted my niece. And I think that we have to go back to the table and we have to speak on all these, child care providers, especially women of color, because sometimes we have been doing this since the 1800s and we still are looked down at. They think we're babysitters. You know, I just had someone came in today for a child that had autism, and I typed up a whole program of goals to do. And you know, they think it's because it's our homes, but our housing got to come in and see how our child care is set up. But I just want to say that keep us in mind, bring it back to the table, because we have been working so hard. And I thank all the ladies and gentlemen that are here, that are providers, that are in the game and are making change and are change makers. And that's all I have to say. And have a blessed and victorious day.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and feedback and your questions. Hopefully, if we can stay on time, we'll have a couple other opportunities for public comment. This concludes our discussion for Equity Indicator 7. Just as a reminder, as we start to move into the next section, please make sure everybody's probably been staring at a screen for a while. Give your eyes a break, take a stretch, take a deep breath, and a little break from your screen. That's important. And with that, I will turn the presentation back over to Lisa Sullivan, Child Development Consultant.
Thank you, George. Good evening, everyone. We are ready now to launch the discussion and recommendations for our second equity indicator for today, which is communications, outreach, and systems alignment. We are going to break this indicator apart into two discussions. We will first focus on communications and outreach. And in order to help set the context for this indicator, we have gathered some context information for you. I would like to share some of California's current resources regarding communications and outreach. Currently, some of the resources we have for communications and outreach for Quality Counts California are the Quality Counts California website, and we can drop a link in the chat for that. We also have the Quality Counts California email listserv. These emails go out on Fridays and have all kinds of wonderful updates relevant to the QCC or Quality Counts California community. All three state agencies, California Department of Social Services, California Department of Education, and First 5 California, each have their own listservs, newsletters, and web pages that share valuable resources. And each county and consortia also have their own outreach efforts for their communities that varies across the state. I will now hand it over to Erin Doobie with the California Department of Education, who's here to share some information with you about a new effort that they are leading.
Thanks, Lisa. Happy to be here this evening. Hi, I'm Erin Doobie. I'm the administrator in the Inclusive Universal Pre-Kindergarten Office within the Early Education Division at the California Department of Education. I'm excited to walk you through an initial design concept for program level badging. Next slide, please. Program level badging is a concept for a flexible quality improvement tool that is not about rating, but rather a way for all types of early learning settings to be recognized by their strengths and to provide pathways for focused quality improvement. Program level badging will be designed to allow demonstration of program quality in key areas across all setting types, including centers, family childcare homes, and family friend and neighbor. This concept is designed to be child-centered, asset-oriented, support diverse programs across all setting types, and help families make informed choices. We see this as an opportunity to enhance the existing quality improvement system while intentionally integrating the master plan for early learning and care recommendations and the work being done within this equity-centered QRIS advisory panel. So as we dive in, we would like to acknowledge that we're working on a small program badging component of a much larger quality improvement system that is actively changing and evolving, and accept that we don't know everything about how this will come together yet, and we want to work to ensure all voices and program types are included. The CDE is not alone in this work. We are fortunate to have many people supporting this work, including state agency staff from First 5 California, the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and consultation from the Department of Social Services, as well as multiple external consultants provided by philanthropic and state agency funding. Next slide, please.
Erin,
So there,
if you could slow down just a little bit for the interpreter. Thank you.
There are a few conceptual characteristics of program level badging. Badging recognizes a program's organizational infrastructure, inclusive of systems, policies, and collective capabilities, provides information to families and the community on program strengths, requires evidence across the entire program, such as across multiple classrooms or groups for centers or large family childcare homes, and could provide opportunity for quality incentives. Next slide, please. We are currently working on the design and development, and that process will continue into 2026. 3 initial badges are being conceptualized, and they align nicely with this panel's equity indicators. They are inclusion and serving children with disabilities, supporting multilingual and multicultural learners, and family leadership and engagement. We are currently working on a framework for each badge and plan to pilot in 2026 and 2027. We want to gather as much feedback as we can on how this works for educators and site leaders, as well as quality improvement system administrators, and will revise and refine as work progresses. And I will talk more about the opportunity to be part of the development process in just a moment. I want to emphasize that we really want this to be something that programs and providers see themselves in, that reflects California's values, and that is supportive, engaging, and rewarding for those who participate. Next slide, please. So, what would a program badge look like? I want to emphasize that this is conceptual, and we have a lot of work to do. We also really want to hear from early learning professionals about all of their ideas about the design, because if it doesn't work for educators, it doesn't work. Our initial thoughts are that each badge would consist of a menu of multiple items, and a program would select a set number of those to demonstrate strength in that badge area. These are just examples, but the inclusion badge could include items like a written inclusion policy that addresses accommodations for children with diverse needs, accessible curriculum materials and physical environment, regular parent-teacher conferences focused on individualized support, and documented partnerships with early intervention specialists and therapists. Next slide, please. So as I wrap up my time today, we are really looking for more voices from the profession to contribute to this effort. If you are interested in providing feedback or engaging further on badge development, please scan the QR code on the slide to fill out a short survey. Should you have any additional questions or would prefer to provide feedback outside the survey, please send us an email at qcc@cde.ca.gov. And thank you for the opportunity to share. And I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Lisa.
Thank you so much, Erin. We have gathered a high-level overview of what some other states are doing in regards to communications and outreach, and here are some of those efforts. Communication is tailored across different groups, families, program types, the public, etc. Some states are providing one-pagers in multiple languages, featuring frequently asked questions and engagement opportunities for families and programs. Some states are sharing information with early learning communities through local advertising channels, such as radio, parent periodicals, newspapers, etc. And some states are engaging in public awareness campaigns to promote transparency. For example, social media, videos, badges, etc. All right, Krista, I'm handing it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. This time we are ready to move into panelist recommendations around communication and outreach. So next slide, please. We are looking for your recommendations around what communication and outreach practices are most effective to ensure that the QRIS, whatever iteration it becomes, makes sense for families and is useful as they make choices for early learning and care, and that it is accessible and beneficial to all providers across all setting types. We will have about 10 minutes for this activity. So again, we have our 4 equity priority areas. The first being that all providers are recognized for their strengths and specific regulatory health and safety requirements. And guiding questions, panelists, as you think about your recommendations for this indicator, is how can we ensure that providers across all setting types have access to information about quality systems and resources? What types of communication works well to engage the early learning and care community? And what might some specific population targeted strategies be that are more effective? What is working for communication and what might be missing? And the next equity priority is that quality definitions center family needs and priorities. And as Dr. Austin shared, data from QRIS systems across the country showed that families largely saw star ratings as too complicated and not meaningful way for them to understand a program's quality. How can we help families be aware of and understand provider and early learning and care program strengths? For example, some ways to recognize strengths include micro-credentials or badges, degrees, parent feedback surveys, training certificates, etc. How effective are these as a way to message quality? Are there any considerations for different setting types? And what suggestions might you have as a panelist? And I will pause there, thinking about just those first 2 equity priorities and turn things over to our panel. We could go into gallery view, please. Panelists, go ahead and raise your hand if you would like to offer a comment or have a question at this time. A reminder that you can also share your comments in chat. Please do select everyone so members of the public are able to see what you share. Would anyone like to offer their thinking or questions around these first 2 aspects of communications and outreach? Jennifer, yes, I see your hand. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Can't figure it out. Based on the work that we do is trying to get to really marginalized communities in the Central Valley in particular. And what we have learned about reaching those communities is, number one, to not assume that people have a computer or that they use email. So digital strategies should definitely include text messaging and social media platforms that are used by marginalized communities. So that's number one. Number two, word of mouth marketing. The promotoras and other kinds of community stakeholders who can directly reach people one-on-one. Word of mouth is hands down more effective than any kind of digital recruitment or pieces of paper. We also hang flyers in local communities, intentionally targeting those that we're trying to get to and going to the places where people are, in the tienda, in the laundromat, wherever people are. The other thing, and this should be a no-brainer, but it's not, that 100% of materials should be translated correctly and completely into multiple languages. Left and right, we say like, oh yes, we hear it's translated into Spanish, and it's part of it's translated into Spanish, but not all of it. And the last part of that, I would say, is when we think about QCC, defining that very broadly to include like the licensing system and materials to ensure that that all of that information is accessible in multi languages as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Lots of concrete recommendations for things that are working well. Lori, please unmute and go ahead. And Lori, I think, oh, there you are. Are you able to unmute?
Yes, sorry.
There you go.
I was going to say everything that Jennifer just shared, but also really utilizing our community-based organizations that are trusted partners for providers, especially our providers that might be refugees or leery of the general community that we live in. Using cultural navigators to engage with them. The translation is so key. So often we hear that things are translated into multiple languages, but it ends up being in English and Spanish and Chinese. And our community is very heavily Arabic, Farsi, Dari, Somali speaking, along with English and Spanish. And really making sure if they don't see themselves in the system, they're not going to participate. And I think too often they see QRIS with center-based programs, more likely state-funded center-based programs, not even a lot of community-based programs. So the FCCs have to see themselves. They have to be invited to participate and be recruited to participate and not be restricted because we've already gotten our quota of FCCs. There should be like no limit of how many programs that can participate in QCC. And until we get to a point where we can offer it to everybody, I think we're going to always be hitting walls where people don't see themselves in the system.
Thank you, Lori. And great segue into the third equity priority, which is that public funds are disseminated equitably to recognize and advance quality. And our guiding question was, what types of investments are needed to prioritize effective messaging and to engage specific populations? How can we consider the needs of all setting types, including center-based, family child care, and family friends and neighbor? So hearing lots of great suggestions already from the panel. Carolyn, please unmute and go ahead.
I'm interested in thinking about how, seeing in the chat some of the comments about family care providers not really connecting with the quality measures or that them applying for their setting. And I'm wondering at the same time if as we look at these quality elements, what is the impact as a result of using the ASQ or another developmental screening and using that for planning? What is the impact that that has? Because my perspective on early childhood educators is we do this because we care and we're motivated by that. And so finding a way to connect to the differences, the positive changes we can make may be the narrative that will help also, in addition to the other suggestions.
Thank you, Carolyn. Any other comments from our panelists about communications and outreach before we move to public comment? Isela, please go ahead.
I wanted to echo the comment that Jennifer made about the translation and others, that it isn't an afterthought. That when things are being created, training, professional development, documents, whatever it is, that it's always at the forefront, that is part of the planning. And it's accounted for and it's budgeted for, because a lot of times it's always an afterthought. We have so many valuable professional development trainings out there that are available, and they're not multilingual. They're not accessible to those that can't speak English or aren't speaking English. And so it's important just to emphasize that it has to be part of the planning. It just cannot be an afterthought. We are California. We are multilingual in California.
Thank you, Isela. And we have time for one more comment from the panel, if anyone would like to share. All right, and panelists, please do consider those equity priorities as you formulate your recommendations for communications and outreach. At this time, we are excited to hear from the public, so I'll hand things off to George for our second out of 3 rounds of public comment today.
Thank you, Krista. Members of the public, you've heard from the panel. We'd like to hear from you next. What are your thoughts about how QRIS can best support communications and outreach? We are also opening the chat if you'd like to put your comments into chat. If you'd like to make a verbal comment, please raise your hand at this time and I will call on you. We have about 10 minutes, 2 minutes per person. Unfortunately, I will have to cut you off, but you can finish your comments in the chat. Please remember to speak slowly and clearly for our interpretation staff. Making sure the raise hand feature is on because I do not see any at this time. Okay.
There's a message in the chat that's saying it's not on.
It's just come on, so people are raising their hands. Serena Lynn is for, oh, sorry. I'm going to go to Rebecca Grassley. Rebecca, please unmute your line and make your comments.
Thanks, everyone. It's grass tea. Cows eat grass.
Sorry.
People drink tea. No worries. I get it all the time. I think it's really important in the messaging that's put out that the messaging be honest. And the reality with that messaging is family childcare, unless you're in a fetching that is also inequitable because there are only 5 and they're only in certain parts of the state. And with those fetchings, they also have the right to deny you instead of support you before you even get started, is that family childcare is not involved in UPK. It doesn't matter how many pieces of paper it's put on until a 3 or 4-year-old in UPK or TK is funded the exact same way they are attending some sort of public school program that is free to them. Only then, when it's funded the same for that child to attend a family childcare, will a family childcare be involved in UPK. And wraparound services do not count because, again, a child in a wraparound service at a school would be paid for or subsidized for any child attending that program, unlike a child attending any other program with a family childcare provider. So ultimately, the messaging needs to be accurate. Family childcare outside of a fetching is not part of UPK. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Lucia, you're next. Please go ahead and unmute your line and make your comments.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Lucia Garay, I'm retired and I'm a consultant. I have 2 points. First, going back to the comments made around translations, I want to just emphasize the fact that translations are not culturally appropriate. And so we really, for any of this work, if we really want it to be well received and participatory, we must have input from the various cultural groups in what and how the communications go out and the materials are developed, not only translating the white dominant created versions. The second piece is on the badging and the comment just made. I would like to recommend that the badging system as it's being developed include a possibility badge of developmental monitoring to planning. This would create a more even field for many families who need and select that family childcare instead of the FCHN, in having a more equitable opportunity for their children to also have that developmental observation and individualized planning for their developmental needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Tia. Marcella Graves, you're next. Please go ahead and unmute your line and make your comments.
Yes, hi, good evening. I just want to say that that for them to include childcare providers in the TK system, because all I hear is, enroll your child in school or Head Start or whatnot, but I don't hear anything about you can have a choice, And some of the parents, they'll come to me and they say, well, I'm going to go to school, take my child to school. I said, for what? For the TCAS, I said, well, I offer that here too, or whatnot. But they seem like they feel that it's mandatory, that they don't have a choice and say so on the matter. And they should make that more clear that they can have a choice. That's what they said in the beginning before all this stuff became implemented. Include home child care providers as well. Do not exclude us. We're important, just like the schools are. We're educated. We offer more, matter of fact, than what they do at the school. We do a lot more. So please include child care providers in the TK system as well. There need to be more advertising and just saying, sign up for school. Thank you.
Thank you. Manju, you're next. Please go ahead and unmute your line and make your comments.
Yeah, hello, this is Manju and I am from Santa Clara County. And what I said, like I have been joining the panelist and group or advisory group or whatever is the coming on our way. Always I am part of that. And then we have been keep talking where we are in UPK or TK or universal pre-K, anything. We are nowhere anywhere. We are just keep talking. Nobody's listening, nobody's doing anything. Just people say, okay, talk, public comment. I don't know how much it get affecting or not, but we are going to down. If we are not there, we cannot open our daycare because our daycare is now kids. I have only 3 or 4. We don't have all kids gone in preschool. So where it will go, how it will go, nobody's saying, nobody's educating to us. So my question is where we are in UPK and TK.
Thank you, Manju. We don't actually respond to questions during the public comment period, but I think part of the message is there needs to be more communication around what's going on. So thank you for your comments. Pamela Rocha, you're next. Please go ahead and unmute your line and make your comments.
Yes, so again, like my sisters both just said, I'm going to agree with them. Family childcare needs to be included in UPK and TK. But on a side note, back to what the first panelist was saying in reference to the Quality Counts program. I've been a part of the Quality Counts program since I've been a childcare provider. So that's been the last 16 years now. And I don't have a rating from the Quality Counts program. They rate the preschools and they rate our centers, but they do not rate family childcare homes in Siskiyou County at all. So even your own programs aren't adhering or providing guidance as to where we need to be or what we need to work on or what their own centers need to work on. That's all.
Thank you, Pamela. LaTanya Brown, you're next. Please go ahead and unmute your line and make your comments.
Hello?
Go ahead. We can hear you, LaTanya.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so grateful for the help, everybody trying to work together and help each other. I've serviced the youth in Fresno County, and a lot of my work is volunteer because there's no pay to help. I work with school-age children as well with IEPs, and I like what the lady said from UC Berkeley about how we can work together and have people go to school that'll encourage them to go to school more when they work together as a group. And that really is helpful because some of these college courses is hard. I mean, and I graduated from X-ray tech school. So I'm not no light dummy, but some of these courses is hard. So I just want to say thank you to everyone, and I'll type my comments in the section that I put some questions as well. Like on the major grants for FCCs, a lot of the help went to the big businesses, not to the FCCs for the major renovation grant. It went like to the big businesses instead of the little people. So yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, LaTanya. We have time for one more comment if somebody wants to. I don't have any hands raised, or I could read one from chat. Oh, did I see a hand go up? Went back down. Pamela, you've already spoken, so I'm afraid we don't call second time in the same section, but we hopefully will have one more comment section, public comment. Oscar Tang, please go ahead and make your comment. This will be our last speaker, so if anybody's waiting, please put your comments in chat. Go ahead, Oscar.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Oscar. I'm from San Francisco, and I want to take this opportunity to share from the family childcare community. We are very involved in the quality setting, and then last week we have our quality consortium meeting. We agreed that child well-being is central to the quality and a strong predictor of long-term success. One tool that can support this is the, I don't know how to spell, but Leuven well-being and involvement scales. What I appreciate is how clear and simple it is. It helps us observe whether a child feels comfortable, confident, and engaged with their environment and the adults around them. Bringing a tool like this into QRIS or QIS would make well-being visible, measurable, and actionable. It could guide providers in reflecting on daily practice whilst strengthening the relations and environment children need to thrive. As we align our quality measure, I encourage us to include child-centered indicator like this, so our systems stay focused on what truly matters, the lived experience of children in our care. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. A great sentiment to end on. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and feedback, as well as your questions. We appreciate you taking your time to be here today, especially with this extended meeting time. With that, I will turn things back over to Lisa.
Thank you, George. All right, we will now continue our discussion of Indicator 8, this time focusing on systems alignment. In order to help set the context for this indicator, we have gathered some contextual information for you. Sorry, I lost my slides. I apologize for that. Okay. So I would like to share with you some of California's current resources regarding systems alignment. The Master Plan for Early Learning and Care is California's roadmap for building a stronger, more equitable early learning and childcare system. The Master Plan provides direction for building a comprehensive system over time, one that partners with families, takes a whole child approach to ensure that the best outcomes, and supports the advancement of early learning and care professionals to ensure that families across California have equitable access to quality care and learning support. There is also the Early Childhood Policy Council, or ECPC, that elevates the needs of young children and their families, as well as advises the governor, legislature, and the superintendent of public instruction on statewide early learning, care, and child development. It provides recommendations on all aspects of the state's early childhood system, including support for the demographic, geographic, and economic diversity of the state's children and families, and the ways that the Master Plan for Early Learning and Care and the Assembly Blue Ribbon Commission on Early Childhood Education's final report can be updated and improved. Within Quality Counts California, we have things such as our regional hubs, the local consortia, the Quality Continuum Framework and Core Tools and Resources documents, which we shared the link earlier in the chat. We have the advisory panels and work groups such as this one and others, as well as programs like the Quality Counts California Higher Education Faculty Group, just to name a couple. On that note, I'm going to now hand it over to Kristen Torres from First 5 California, to share some of the work that they are doing over there along these lines. Krista?
Thank you, Lisa. Our Executive Director, Jackie Wong, does send her apologies for being unable to attend today, but I am here to present the information in her place. Starting in January of 2020, First Five California entered into a contract with WestEd for our Building Equitable Early Learning Systems work. The vision of this, also called BEALS for short, is to determine counties' needs and inform the co-development of transformational systems equity work. Providing an opportunity for counties to grow beyond the adoption and adaptation of existing models to co-design a California-specific roadmap that will sustain and expand systems and programs that advance equity and quality for all children and families. The work of BEALS falls into three broad categories, including the First Five California Strategic Plan, Sustainable Equity Framework and Infrastructure, and Workforce Supports and Infrastructure Activities. Starting with the workforce supports and infrastructure activities, those include, as Lisa briefly mentioned earlier, our engagement with institutions of higher education, specifically collaborating and partnerships with our higher ed faculty, through ongoing discussions and communities of practice, developing a train the facilitator for the adult learning and coaching course that was designed through the Department of Social Services, but really to provide sustainability and access for that. Enhancements to the Quality Counts California website. We actually have some enhancements that will be released very soon on that website. And supporting the Quality Counts California tri-agency leadership and state support team collaboration, as well as enhancing our trainer toolkit that was developed under a previous funding stream to really expand the facilitators and trainer reflection tools and provide exemplar videos and examples. For sustaining equity framework and infrastructure, we've conducted regional early learning and care systems landscape and equity assessments. We're continuing to examine the role of the regional hubs that are funded through our Impact Legacy grants in advancing the equitable access to resources for our early learning and care workforce. We have the First Five California Early Learning Advisory Group that are working on regional action plans for equity and sustainability. And then so that's our local leadership groups, apologies. And then we have our advisory group, our early learning advisory group that really serves as an advisory board to First Five California. And then finally, all of these things really work towards and support operationalizing our North Star and audacious goal, and supporting the goals and priorities of First Five California's new strategic plan that was adopted for 2025 through 2028. And I will pass it back to Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. We have also gathered a high-level overview of what other states are doing in regards to systems alignment, and here are some of those efforts. Some states are collaborating with their early learning coalitions to keep provider profiles updated with information on quality and program highlights. For example, hours of operation, types of curricula used, etc. Some states are leveraging their childcare resource and referral networks to engage and increase the supply of high-quality care in targeted communities. And some states are engaging in revision processes, following the plan, do, study, act cycle approach, allowing them to pilot components of QRIS and make adjustments to better understand how the components best fit together. Krista, I'm going to hand it back to you for our panel recommendations.
Thank you, Lisa. We are excited to move into the final set of panel recommendations. And again, this is for the systems alignment component of our equity priority that, sorry. Apologies, I have a cold and my throat is getting scratchy. We are moving into Equity Indicator 8. The second half is systems alignment. And the definition here for communications outreach and systems alignment is to prioritize effective messaging to the public and the early learning and care community. Employ strategies that better engage specific populations so all communities see themselves as part of the system, and reduce or eliminate barriers to access by aligning systems. So really focusing on how the pieces of the system all work together to provide accessible and effective support for the workforce and for children and families. We will be focusing again our conversation around the 3 equity priorities. The first equity priority is that all providers are recognized for their strengths and specific regulatory health and safety requirements. As you think about recommendations, what efforts are working well to ensure all communities see themselves as part of the QCC system? What should change or be added? And I'll pause there for comments from the panelists. Again, panelists, this is your opportunity to share your thinking as you are formulating your recommendations. Please go ahead and use the raise hand feature or raise your hand and I will call on you if you would like to comment. Rachel, please unmute and go ahead.
I have questions on, so in the master plan, it says that family child care providers will take care of infants, toddlers, and other children. So it kind of reads as that the system is going to be taking away the children that are in the 3 to 5-year-olds and moving them into another system. Why would we be doing that if we have been doing the work and taking care of these children that are in that age group for years, since the beginning of childcare? And then, like, it's kind of shows in the way the system of the UPK and the TK system, how they have taken the kids from our programs and we're not even allowed to be in that system. So how are the systems aligned if we, as family childcare providers, are not included in those systems whatsoever? If there's only a fetch-in for like 5 counties, how are we being included in these systems? And how can we be respected in these systems when even Dr. Leah said that most of us have a degree, and a bachelor's degree or master's degree, some sort of college, when most people don't even understand what we do and don't realize that we have those education levels. And a lot of times in the counties, we aren't even included in their QCC programs. So how are the systems aligned if we're not included in all of that?
Thank you, Rachel. Real strong call out to ensure that it's not just about it's not just about helping people see themselves, but really changing the system to include all setting types in your examples, especially family childcare. Latanya. Oh, sorry. Right now, this session is for panelists to give comment of members of the public. If you could hold on for just a minute, we will move to public comment right after this. So our second equity priority is around quality definitions that center family needs and priorities. And in this case, we are interested in hearing from our panelists what are some examples of effective family engagement that is part of the current QCC system, and what efforts are in place that might change or might be missing and need to be added. So thinking about how the system that we have serves both families and providers across all setting types. And I'll pause here for any additional panelist comment. And while you're thinking about that, next slide. The third equity priority is around public funds. And again, how public funds are disseminated equitably to recognize and advance quality. And as you're thinking about that, consider what types of investments are needed so all communities see themselves and are fully part of the system. And how should we consider the needs of all setting types, including family, friend, and neighbor? Carolyn, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
I'd like to speak to the previous slide, and I'm wondering about examples of effective family engagement. And a bigger challenge is when Senate Bill 792 under Senator Mendoza was adopted, it required licensed child care providers to obtain the immunization records and TB for any adult that was interacting with a child. And I understand the intent. I appreciate the intent. It has decimated the volunteer system in a lot of programs. And so I would like to see that changed so that we can get back to really partnering with our families and not being worried about a licensing violation due to not having something for an adult that's volunteering and has been cleared in all other areas. And so that was my one thing that I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Any other comments from the panelists? Can we go back to the slide, please, that has all 4 equity priorities? There we go. So as you consider each one of these 3 equity priorities around aligning and reducing barriers to systems, what are your thoughts around recommendations, things that are working well that we need to do more of, or changes that you would like to see? And certainly many of the comments shared tonight all have an impact on systems, including what was shared in the prior conversation around language access and types of communication. And our final equity priority that we will ask the panelists to respond to with their written recommendations is around racial equity approaches and ensuring that racial equity approaches and strategies are embedded across all indicators. So as you know, that's the overarching focus of our work. As you make those recommendations, think about any additional racial equity approaches that should be considered when we are thinking about systems and systems alignment. And before I go to public comment, just want to pause and offer one last opportunity for our panelists to share their thoughts. All right, seeing none there, we will yield some additional time to public comment. Thank you, panelists. Oh, sorry, Carolyn, go ahead.
Just really quick, I wanted to clarify on the public funds are disseminated equitably to recognize and advance quality, how we are supporting our partners that may need that support due to transitions and changes in their staffing or other configuration changes to raise that level of quality again. So I'm curious about how we might be able to do that.
Thank you, Carolyn. All right, and with that, I will hand back over to George for our final round of public comment for tonight.
Thank you, Krista. Members of the public, you've heard from the panel. We'd like to hear from all of you. We are now opening for verbal public comment. And how can QRIS best support systems alignment? We have a little over 10 minutes, so please, this is a great time to add in your comments. As with previous times, you'll have 2 minutes to share. Please make sure you speak at a slow pace so that our interpreters can keep up with your comments. And first up is Rebecca Grassley. Please unmute and go ahead and make your comments.
So some notes I made. This equitable part really goes back to this idea that veterans are only for part of the state, not all of them. FCC isn't part of this strategic plan that's really moving forward, that's focused on putting children in institutionalized settings. You mentioned aligning with other states. The majority of other states align age ranges as infants, children under 18 months. California is one of only 6 states that children are still counted as infants until 24 months. So if we want to consider alignment, we really need to consider realigning these age ranges. And to that point, a child 18 months can be in a toddler component in a center, but they are an infant in a family child care home. So if we want to build alignment, we really need to look within first. We're talking about really referencing a parent's authentic choice and where they see themselves. A parent sees themselves with their authentic choice in a family child care home before they see themselves in an institutionalized school. And that's also typically where they tend to put their children. So that's also going to be more culturally responsive than an institutionalized setting is. And if we're going back to quality, quality is a relative term. Tennessee shows that even with 9 of 10 of NEAR's quality standards, that the children who did not attend institutionalized care still were less behavior problems, and the kids who did attend institutionalized care, it's Dr. Ferran out of Tennessee, you should look it up. It's the institutionalized pre-K, TK that were the behavior problems and behind academically. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Marcella Graves, you're next. Please go ahead and unmute your line and make your comments. And a reminder to the rest of the public, the chat feature is also open and will remain open after this public comment section since we're almost done with the meeting. So please add your comments there as well.
Yes, hi. Good evening again. This is Marcella Graves. I was just saying that, yes, we just need to make the high quality care, regardless of income and race, for every child, every parent, you know, and all and various levels and all levels, instead of just, you know, putting one to the side. And I just, like I said, we need to work together, come together, not just talking about being about it, you know, and working together, and not not working with child care providers to work with us, all work together as one and building us up as well as they're doing the school system. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcella. Latanya Brown, please go ahead and unmute and make your comments.
Hi again. I want to ask if you could put the information. They said it's a meeting tomorrow night as well. The lady from UC Berkeley, she said it's a meeting tomorrow night, giving people more information. If you could put that in the chat so I can join that.
Yeah, we dropped that in the chat a little earlier, but we will try and find it and put it back in for everybody.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say it's good to have teachers that look like the students because they understand where they're coming from and some of the things that they're going through. That could be able to help the parents and families more, have more understanding if you've been where they, already are. And yeah, that will help a lot in the communities. And we got to give back like all the women that's educated and stuff like that. We're going to have to give back to our community. We don't have to wait on nobody to do it for us. We just got to do it to help these children. They smart, and they just have to get an understanding of things, and you can see then they'll just build their confidence and they'll flourish if you take time with the children. That's what I do, and I give them one-on-one, and I'm seeing them growing. They're coming back and telling me their teachers say they're doing so much better. So we got to give back. The ones us that say we got an education, we got to give back to these babies so they can give back as well. We don't have to wait on nobody to do it for us. I appreciate, we all work together, get all the help we can, but we got to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Latonya. And just so you know, we just put the link to the Justice Toolkit webinar that Dr. Austin referenced earlier in the chat. So if you click on that link, it'll take you to the information. Anybody else like to make a public comment at this time? I know it's late, it's been a long meeting, but this is an opportunity to speak directly to the advisory panel as well as a lot of the CDSS staff and other interest holders. So please raise your hand if you'd like to speak. Isika, please unmute and go ahead and make your comments. Isika? We can't hear you, your line. You should be able to unmute yourself. I'm still showing you as muted on our end, but if you can unmute on your Zoom, you can talk now. Oh, she put her hand down. I'm sorry about that, Jessica. Please make sure you put your comments in the chat for us. Okay, give it one more try. If anybody else would like to make a public comment at this time. Okay, well, with that, I will close out public comment time and turn things back over. Who am I turning it back over to? I'm not sure. I think I'm turning it back over to Nadira.
Thank you. Is that we're good to go, Krista? I just want to double check.
Oh, sorry, there's did I miss next steps?
I think Krista's next. Yes, with next steps.
There we go. Sorry about that.
No worries.
No problem. Thank you all, and I echo George's thanks for our members of the public for your interest and feedback. As we bring tonight's meeting to a close, I'd like to remind our panelists to please make sure that you add any recommendations that you shared verbally or in chat to that note catcher document. And panelists, you have until Thursday, October 2nd to complete your recommendations. The final set of recommendations for equity indicators 7 and 8 that we discussed tonight will be shared with the public as part of the final panel report at the next Equity-QRIS advisory panel meeting. I am now handing things back to Nadira Jones to wrap up today's meeting. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Krista. And thank you to the panelists, our guest speakers, and members of the public for a robust and productive discussion today. At this time, I would like to open the chat to everyone and invite you to drop any takeaways from today's meeting. As you think about our North Star, equity is quality and quality is equity, what did you take away from today that will move us along our journey to achieving this North Star? We'll pause for a moment as you type into the chat. We'll appreciate any comments. And then we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. So we hope to see you in November when we reconvene to gather our final recommendations for the ECE-QRIS Advisory Report. Amazing. It's been a long time coming. And so we can go to the next slide, please. Please email us with any comments or questions. The email address is on the screen and we can also add it to the chat. All materials from the panel meeting are available on the CDSS ECQRIS website, which is also on the slide. We're adding the website link to the chat as well. Please join the Child Care and Development Division listserv to get email updates. You can also scan the QR code on the screen to join the listserv. We are also posting that in the chat as well. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in November. This now concludes today's meeting. Interpreters, thank you, and you may sign off now. Thank you all. We'll keep the chat open for 5 minutes. Thank you.